A lot was learned this episode about thrusters and ground travel, and I picked up a tip on using the Rover on rough ground you've got to see. The mobile base got a huge makeover, well, actually 2 makeovers because the first one failed miserably. But 2 times is definitely a charm, and taught me you sometimes have to either go big or stay on the planet. So let's check it all out. In Space Engineers, it's all about designing and testing, then more redesigning, and more rework, until you get a build that seems to work the way you want it. And to a large extent, it's a big part of the game's intrigue. I mean, if everything worked perfectly the first time, I think I'd be missing that element of creativity. Because it's the fact that there are some basic constraints you need to work with that make you have to think and rethink, and eventually come up with a design that works, and one that you enjoy. This episode was certainly no exception. Having made it to the ice lake, I completed what I saw as the next big step. With an endless supply of ice available to make hydrogen and oxygen, I could start adding hydrogen thrusters to the ship and get it equipped for space. Now, if you're new to Space Engineers or just want the bottom line version on progression with thrusters and getting to space, it's like this. Atmospheric thrusters only work in atmosphere and lose power as you gain altitude until you get to space, at which point they do nothing. They also use electricity. Hydrogen thrusters work equally well for the most part in atmosphere or in space and use hydrogen from ice as power. Finally, there's ion thrusters, which do work very weakly in atmosphere but are meant for space for all practical purposes. They also use electricity. So for me, getting to this ice lake using the atmospheric thrusters was huge. It unlocked hydrogen for the hydrogen thrusters, so I could finally make it to space. But first, there was some ship redesign and gathering of resources, which in the process led me to a nice discovery about using the Rover. This redesign would be simple, at least I thought. Add more height to the placement of the vertical thrusters so they don't burn a hole in my platform or base, pop on a couple hydrogen thrusters for lift, then tear off the small thrusters that were completely inadequate and replace them with large hydrogen thrusters for reverse braking, side to side, and forward movement. Easy, right? Well, it was, and I was also able to climb the steep hills and navigate the rougher terrain around this ice lake with the Rover to gather up more gold and iron, and of course, get some ice and hydrogen stockpiled. Now, I had built one large hydrogen tank and a hydrogen generator to get it filled, which was all I figured I needed. So it was time for its first test. Simple and easy. Take the mobile base to that ENAT station about 45 kilometers away and give the rework a little test. The ship took off and flew from the new base without a hitch, but it only took a minute to see there were problems. I had barely obtained some altitude and left the perimeter of the ice lake, and I had already used a significant percentage of my hydrogen. But I figured it might slow down once I got up to speed. Even the atmospheric thrusters consume a lot of power while accelerating, but this was not looking good. Even before leaving sight of the ice lake, I was down to about 70% of my hydrogen. I did notice that my hydrogen thrusters for vertical lift were burning hard in addition to my forward thrusters. Now, what I'd like to know in the comments from any space engineer experts is there a way to have the ship prioritize the atmospheric thrusters over the hydrogen ones without having to just turn them off? For me, it looked like it was doing it the other way around, and I kind of needed both types, at least some, due to the weight of the ship. But regardless of priority, one thing was certain. I was not going to make it to the ENAT station on hydrogen. And if by some miracle I did make it, I'd have nothing left to make it back to the ice lake. So it was an about face and back to the base for another whack-it redesign. This time though, I wasn't going to hold back. I decided it was time for a big makeover and tore off the entire front of the ship. I was going to extend the front out several blocks and raise the interior height so I had a full 6 blocks of headspace on the inside. This would give me plenty of space for several hydrogen tanks a future reactor, and more large storage, because I was starting to sense that I'd need it, and other components that I had yet to build needed to go in there. On the inside, what I ended up with was 6 large hydrogen tanks, a big improvement over the 1 tank, and a total of 8 hydrogen-oxygen generators to help refill those 6 tanks a little faster. While I was at it, I built a large reactor, because I had plenty of gravel lying around, and increased the number of batteries I had from 20 to 40, double what I had before. I needed those batteries for a couple reasons, and one was that I decided to place a total of 6 vertical atmospheric thrusters to lift the ship. Theoretically, I should be able to lift at least 3.6 million kilograms of weight with just the atmospheric thrusters. Plenty of lift all by itself for atmospheric travel, and that was more than double the weight I was currently hauling. With this additional lift, I could completely turn off the hydrogen thrusters for any lift, and because I had both hydrogen and atmospheric thrusters for forward movement, I could turn off the forward hydrogen thrust ones too. The only hydrogen thrusters I'd use full time were those ones for braking and the side-to-side directional movement. This expanded ship and new thruster setup was amazing, and I got to the ENAT station with plenty of hydrogen and battery power to spare. One of the reasons for choosing the ENAT station as my test location was because of the scouting I had done earlier during the search missions, where I had also marked a number of boulders I could mine. The only thing I really had to mine with was my rover, and I was holding off building a mining ship until I went to space. Now, I thought this ENAT area was going to be easier travel than back in the mountainous ice lake, and it was in some areas, but in an attempt to reach a gold boulder, I wound up in some of the sparniest ground area I had yet to traverse. But with every challenge comes some learning, and this was no exception. As I was going up and down ravines, trying to avoid the erosion channels and dead-end cliffs, I realized something about the terrain on this Earth-like planet. The rocky or light wheat-looking grass areas is where the terrain was very likely to be questionable with big ruts and stuff. If I followed the dark green grassy areas, they were almost 100% free of any rover hazards. They were almost like little roadways, weaving and turning, and avoiding the worst problems. It was definitely worth doing a bit of twisting and turning and hill climbing to avoid those lighter colored areas.
I think I'm getting smarter. It's a piece of cake.
And it led me into some areas that I might have otherwise been leery of, like little canyons that took me around some impassable areas. I did jump out of the rover a couple times and do some aerial recon to find the best path, but the dark green paths still helped confirm what appeared to be a decent route. So follow that dark green grass. It won't disappoint. I did make it back to the ship with my precious gold ore, and the ship made it back to the ice lake. So with a little proof of concept in my pocket, the next steps were to take these stacks of data pads I had acquired and mark some additional stations. Then take another longer planetary trip to explore more of this planet, to see what it had to offer. At least, that's what I had planned. It didn't quite turn out that way. I got a huge surprise. But that's the next episode, and it changed everything for me in the game. No exaggeration. So keep watching the next episode if you don't want to miss it.